There's definitely no vacuuming going on. You're hearing like a whirring noise. How
Yeah,
bad is it?
it's not bad now. Now it's
Okay.
back worse a little bit. Okay, I'm recording. So while Scott's getting all set up, welcome to our Introduction to Online Writing Instruction class. And we might have a few people from the practicum. The Intro to Writing Online Writing Instruction class is the first class in the sequence, and the practicum is the last class for the certificate. So we have some people here who are just getting started in the certificate, and some people who've been all the way through the certificate and are building out their final online course. This is Scott Warnock, who probably needs no introduction. He is a professor of writing. Is that your title, or English?
It's actually English.
English at Drexel University, and he directs the Writing Center and the writing program there. Is that right, still?
Yeah, I'm the director of the university writing program, the Writing Center. By the way, if at any point you can't hear me, am I okay?
Yeah.
If I'm not, just say like can't hear you or whatever. We got to make this. Always when we do these electronic meetings, make sure that we can all hear each other.
And you can
But
also
yeah,
chat. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so if you have any problems, you can send a chat to the group, and I'll monitor that chat window. There's a
cool.
little
And
chat.
I'll look at it too. So if people have questions or whatever. But yeah, I'm the director of the university writing program, and our center is actually in the program. So it's funny. It's a little bit of a thing we differentiate because we have a person who runs that center, and I'm constantly like encroaching on her job. It's something we're trying to. I feel bad about it.
Okay, so I was just going to start out by asking Scott a question, and then I'm going to turn it over to whoever wants to ask questions. We've all read the book. We're almost through with it. I think we're in the last couple chapters now. Scott, I know that you've talked about this, and you write about it a little bit in the book, but what did you see as a need in our field in online writing instruction for a book such as the one you wrote? What were you hoping that you would accomplish by writing this book?
Okay, thanks a lot. And first of all, I really appreciate your having me tonight. I appreciate that you used the book in the class. I appreciate those of you who read it. Heidi had given me a little bit of the feedback that you've given her, and I'm very interested in your thoughts about the book. We're just starting to get some of that feedback. Very unfortunate Diana couldn't be here tonight. She and I tried to work it out yesterday. She got scheduled at work tonight, and she had set this up a month ago, and she was very sorry not to be here. And Heidi was kind of creative and flexible and trying to set maybe another time up, because I really feel, it was funny because Diana said, well, they're going to want to talk to you anyway. And I said, no. And so that's, in answering your question is, and this is described pretty well in the introduction, as you'll recall, that I had written this first book, Teaching Writing Online, which was professionally, you wish you could say to people, including my own kids, like I had mapped it all out and this is all brilliant strategy, but it really wasn't. I lucked out with that book. It came at the right time, and it worked out really well. And then there was always this idea that there would need to be a sequel, and that sequel kind of took different shapes as I began to do more and more workshops throughout the country based on teaching writing online. NCT was a great partner in my publisher for both books. They actually helped facilitate my getting the kind of word out there. So that's this second book was always in my mind that we would do something. Obviously, teaching writing online evolves rather quickly, so there was this need clearly for more in-depth pedagogy, more people. Like when I would talk to faculty, and sometimes these would be like week-long experiences, and they'd say like, give me more. And I'm very open source, by the way. Anything I've done, I'm happy to share. That stuff in the book, people can just take it and use it. But there was this nagging thing, and it's about teaching writing online, but it's also about teaching in general. And those of you who do a lot of conferencing, you see this. Like, we talk a lot about students, but they're not present very often. So I had this idea with Diane, and again, this is described in the book, so I probably shouldn't go into it in too much detail here, that, simultaneously I said to her, she's a very bright student I'd worked with at Drexel, why don't we do an article? She handed me this like 6,000 word thing right off the bat. And I thought maybe this would be a book. And she went with it. And so we were able to fill this, I think, kind of not just interesting niche in teaching in online writing instruction, but also a kind of educational niche in giving a student and again, a talented student. She's not every student, a full voice in describing, in her case, her experience in the class. And I hope this is, by the way, freewheeling. Very happy to just have a conversation. So, anything you want to ask or throw stones, do whatever you got to do.
All right, everybody. So what questions do you have for Scott? You just unmute and ask them, and we'll go from there.
I have a question that kind of was raised by several of us in our discussions in this class, and that's to do with, we're also reading another book that talks about profiling your learners. So how would you describe the typical students that come into your classes?
That's a really good initial question, by the way. I got burnt early on. I was doing these webinars for NCTE based on teaching writing online, the first book, and I was using like a lot of materials, as I kind of like to do for my students, like showing what they do. It's great if I say, here's discussions, but I was using materials for my students from Drexel, and a few people were like, whoa, like my students are not at that level. The Drexel students they're smart, they're talented, like academically. They're also, Drexel is a specific kind of place because we're a quarter system school. We're one of the biggest, most well-known co-op schools. So that's a huge part of the Drexel experience. By the way, I have a sophomore there now, rising sophomore. If you have like 3 more hours, we could do like a little therapy about my experiences with her. So that'll be for another time since this is being recorded. But these students come in and they are very like focused on what they want to do. They're very professional. Sometimes, especially being in the humanities, too much so. But I feel like the students are like, they're very technologically savvy. They are good at the game of education. And again, that can be a little bit troublesome too, especially in first year writing. They're the kind of students that you encounter who have done well in standardized evaluations and assessments. And then, when you get in first year writing and you say, write a 6-paragraph essay, they're like, I don't know what to do. So they're well prepared writing wise in many ways. And in fact, Drexel doesn't have, we're one of these places that we don't have basic writing. Like I'm saying this kind of sarcastically, but like we're too good for that. Like we don't have that kind of environment at Drexel where students take 101, then 102 and 103. There is no other option for them.
I have a question about the gap between the 2 books, 2009 and 2018. Is there anything you ever go back in that first book and have a little chuckle at? Has anything changed enough? Have you changed your ideas, like about, especially I'm thinking about migration. Do you think that teachers can still migrate from one learning environment to the other?
Thank you for that question. It's interesting thinking about that because I do feel there will come a point when that concept will be less and less relevant because more and more people will not have their foundation. Like, I don't know what your experiences all are. I imagine because you're learning in this environment, like there's still a lot of people who have never learned in this environment, right? Who are teaching. So you've done this now. Like you have some sense of what it's like to participate. Well, actually more than some sense. You have a sense of what it's like to participate as an online learner. So I think that it's funny, like I had never really thought about it. I have to look back and think like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. I think teaching writing online in some ways was so generalizable that I still feel, because I was going through it a lot for the other book, and I was like, I have to say, I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but I stand by it, I guess. I feel like the guidelines that are in there's 30-some guidelines or however many there are, and I feel they're still pretty solid. But I do feel sometimes talking to people about it. I just did a week-long hybrid workshop at Drexel for our first-year writing faculty, and I was using a lot of this migration idea. And I was realizing, like, we have some young, primarily adjunct faculty coming in who are pretty savvy, and I think some of them, their first experiences have been in hybrid and online teaching. So that migration idea, it may start to kind of peel away because people have not only begun their teaching in these environments, but also have gone through experiences like this. I kind of make the comment in the beginning of the new book that there's a lot of people still have never done things like this, you know, even professionally. Like I'm on a school board and all of our training is, you know, you can do it all web-based. And I think there's still a portion of people in academia who can't claim that experience, you know? So I hope that kind of answers your question.
It definitely does. The only thing I'd like to add to that is I think those guidelines bear reprinting. So if you do a third book, I'd put the guidelines in there again instead of, I know a lot of times you cite those, but I like the list. So is it in the second book?
No, but it's funny because you know where they put them very smartly? They put them in the books are sitting here.
Yeah, on the
They're
cover.
in the cover, so they could have been there, you know, like, right, it was kind of cumbersome to have to cross-reference. So, but I appreciate that. Thank you. That's a nice thing to say.
Going forward, before you ask your question, identify yourself just so we can all, so Scott can know what your name is, but also so your classmates can know who you are because you've all been discussion boarding with each other, and this will put a face to that. So Mary just talked, and Stephanie was the first question. So that'll give you, and you can see people's names as well in the bottom corners of their display. All right, next question.
This is Ben. Scott, one thing that really struck me going through the book is just how much you enjoy teaching online. You know, the kind of sense of joy and fun really comes through very strongly. And I was curious about your view of the role of, you know, enjoyment in teaching in general and how that helps you as a teacher, and also how you keep the course fresh and keep the courses enjoyable for yourself over time.
Thanks for that question, too. So today, Drexel, I don't know if Heidi told you, but so we're in the quarter system, as I said, which means we're not in session yet. We start on Monday. So the quarter system is like tilted off a month because, you know, the year is broken into quarters. So I did a workshop just today for new faculty at Drexel, about 35, 40 new people coming to Drexel as faculty. And the session was, they gave me this kind of general topic, meaningful student learning. And I did this thing about frequent low stakes grading. So I did an hour workshop about using a lot of, you know, writing across curriculum type approaches and also quizzing, just giving students more grades. I'm starting off with that as my answer because I was looking at all these new faculty and I'm thinking, I really enjoy what I do. And I think that if you do think of teaching in that way, you're always trying to reinvent what you're doing. And it's just never ending. Like the kind of, I think teaching there's always more to it. And I'm looking at a room full of new people today. And by the way, I got nothing but good vibes from them, in case you thought I was going in a different direction. But, you know, I'm saying, like, here's a list of different ways you could use writing in your class, like metacognitive stuff to get at your students thinking. I don't care if you're teaching like a quant-based course. Using things like in the process of writing a bigger paper, like all these little pieces that you could do, having them use discussion boards to talk about all these different aspects of their learning as they go along. And I really do think that in a lot of ways, although I actually haven't thought about specifically like this question is very provocative because I wonder if, like, I think if you love teaching, I think that, how about I put it this way, that you could love being in the room because certain personalities like lend themselves to that. You know, you're in a room, you're kind of getting that like charismatic buzz, but that online teaching, because it's online by nature, that you really have to have a kind of love of teaching to be in love with that. Because what you're doing is you're kind of like at the core of your students' learning experiences. You kind of see it like that. It's not all just like the show, you know? Because how many times do you have like, wow, we had this fun class, but like, I don't know what my students got out of it. Everyone was laughing and I was cracking jokes up there. But online, I think it's in some ways more substantive. And I think that it kind of like localizes. And I think I had never really thought of it that way. I think it's a really interesting question. So thank you for it.
Well, and I'd like to add really quickly to that too. Like a lot of times when people talk about successful face-to-face classes, what they're talking about is the charisma. They feel that a course has been successful because students smile and laugh and nod. But as a student, I could smile and laugh and nod and be thinking about my grocery list. And in online, you can't do that. Like you're on or off, you know you're there or not. And so I think it's just a lot more, I think it's more engaging online than I do face-to-face, or I think my classes are more engaging online.
Yeah, just to follow that too, I think that there's you're always, I still think, and this kind of goes back to the earlier question too, that you still are, I still think we're arguing for online learning in a lot of ways. I mean, in many ways, like it's kind of like the barn doors open with that. I mean, universities are using it, but in some ways you're still, I'm in a stage of my life now. I have a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 14-year-old. Everybody's thinking about the next step, all the people around me, all the kids I've coached. So you're still like, when people hear like their kid is going to take an online course, I see it in their face, right? They're like, oh, like, what does that mean? So I still think we're still arguing for it in a way. And I really agree very strongly, with Heidi about, this idea of like the substance of online learning. Or I wouldn't do it actually, I guess.
Hi, I'm Jen. I have a question. Everyone can hear me? Okay. I have never taught before, and it's come up in the discussion boards about teaching from a textbook versus using online materials. Which do you find students are more receptive to? Is it like 50-50, or do you think they find it more confusing to have to go to different sources online, or do they prefer just to have one main book to refer to?
Other people might jump in too on this. I think that one of the things I think about online that doesn't have to change, you're asking like a pure teaching question, but in some ways, right? But online, I think your texts don't have to change at all. You're going to probably find yourself doing certain things, I think, not just text-wise, but responding to student writing, like things that you could still pretty much do the way you do them face-to-face or on site, but you kind of find yourself exploring new things digitally because you're in a digital environment. In terms of what students prefer, I wonder if that's, let's take a first-year writing class. We at Drexel use the Norton Field Guide, which I use, by the way. I'm a team player. Like I use the book that we have 155 sections in first-year writing a term, something like that. And I think it's a good way to unify a curriculum. Obviously, publishers, and Michael has a lot of experience with this, have made a lot of effort to put things in digital formats. So with the idea of having students access them. But, I was thinking in terms of your question, like you really can tailor-make classes now, In fact, I'm teaching a class this fall. I don't know if this will help you with the, there's somebody last time I taught this class, it's called the Literature of Business. Students, it's an upper level class. They do literary readings about business, and then they read stuff from like the Harvard Business Review, and they write about these in business genres based on like the characters in the story. I actually love this class. I'm very proud of it. But last time I taught it, I used a packet because I am using like stories, and the packet was like way too expensive. It was actually cumbersome for students to like all the logistics of getting it. I said, the heck with it. I'm using this stuff for educational purposes. Most of the stuff I started using, like I'm using Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People, and I have everything available electronically. And I think it's just so much easier for everybody now. They have, and this, by the way, this is an on-site class. So I just think it's just, I think you're pushing yourself into this environment where it's just like ease of text access. Whereas maybe there was a time when everybody had to have that book open in class at the same page. So does that help answer your question? Or maybe open up some other comments?
I don't know if Michael's looking at the chat or not, but Heidi had sent you a message in the chat, Michael, about talking about the copyright issues. So did you want to, I have another question, but I'll defer to you if you want to address that now.
Oh yeah, I just saw the chat over here. It says, Mike, can you guys hear me? Michael, can you maybe say something about copyright issues regarding print materials in online classes? Yeah, there's a fair use exemption for educational purposes. If you're using a small portion of a book, you are allowed to use that. Technically, you're only supposed to do it once without paying permissions fees to the publishers. Some schools are more surveillance oriented about that than others. I generally try to use as many open source materials as I can. There's a growing OA, and I say this as a professional textbook author and editor, but there is a rapidly growing movement in OER and OA resources, materials that are specifically made available copyright free, or they've waived the copyright restrictions for people to use online. But even if it's a published, a book from a major publisher, if you're using it in a class, you're allowed to use a short excerpt. If you post a PDF on the file, you would be wise to post that behind a firewall, like on your course Blackboard site and not on a public Weebly site, because if Pearson or one of those people finds it, you'll get a takedown notice and a legal threat immediately, because they have bots out there running. I know Pearson does it. I think all the big publishers are checking to see what's out there, because piracy is such a problem with high-end college textbooks. Is that what you were asking for, Heidi? That kind of question?
Yeah, I know that's a little bit tricky. Like when I worked as an instructional designer, we had people who would bring in textbooks and say, "Can you just scan this textbook and put it in my class?" And I'm like, "No, we can't." Or DVDs. We had a lot of people who wanted me to make MP4s of DVDs and put them up in their class, and I'm like, So I also use a lot of open access resources as much as I can. And part of that is an accessibility issue for price for students, really. I mean, some textbooks, especially in tech writing, textbooks can be $120 for a tech writing textbook, and I use a third of that material. So I try as much as possible to think about in terms of how much it's going to cost students.
But this kind of circles back to one of my questions for Scott, and I don't want to jump in on the discussion and disrupt you guys, but
introduce yourself. Sorry, tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm Michael Greer. Sorry. Heidi's partner in crime at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, and some of you will be taking the multimedia class with me soon. To what extent would you say that the students' writing is really the focus of the course and not the textbook anyway? How much time do you devote to students reading each other's work, and how much of that is the center of what you're trying to do? It seems to me that kind of a lot, but do you see it that way?
So Michael just threw me this big softball, and I'm going to smash it right over the fence. Thank you, Michael. And by the way, so I guess you're gathering, but Heidi and I have worked together for a long time very closely, and Michael and I have worked together for a long time very closely too. And I was commissioned by Pearson many years, well, not many, but several years ago, for a textbook project that the development editor was Michael Greer. So, and the project actually didn't work out for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with him. But we have, just so everybody else knows, we have this good history among the three of us, and we're all working together on GSOL. I don't know if folks know about that, but we can talk about that later. But anyway, I believe, in fact, in some ways, what's really driving me and has driven me, I guess I should say, is that very idea that writing courses should be about student writing. And I had this, I don't even know if it's worth calling an aha moment, because it's kind of so obvious. But when you move your writing class into an online environment, and I think I like asynchronous. I use synchronous things in my class, but when you move it into these asynchronous environments, you are suddenly you've enabled many, many writing behaviors by your students that help them develop their writing, I think. So it's funny, I was saying, I use the Norton Field Guide because that's our program book, and we have 3 courses, so I feel a little bit better about price, because our students will take 101, 102, 103 with the same book, okay? But so much of the class is driven by the student texts, and there are a whole variety of things we could talk about with this. Pedagogically, we could talk about all the advantages, and writing about writing, I don't know how much you talked about that, or if folks are aware of that, approach to teaching, where the course is about the writing itself, or some folks call it writing studies. I think this intersection of writing studies and technology is right where we can live very effectively. And like I said, there's pedagogical advantage. I actually think there's political advantages, if you will, for the field. Because if the course is always about student text, it's being created as we go. And no one can take that from us, if you will. You can't automate it. The class it grows as we grow with it as teachers and students. So it's always something different every time. So I feel like the students have this really rich literacy experience online with, and I wish Diana was here to talk about it, because she's so good on this topic, they're writing, we're 10-week terms, 12, 15, sometimes 20,000 words. And then they're all reading and interacting with each other's text. So I think, I still like it. I believe it. I still like the textbooks. I think that the Norton Field Guide, for instance, is a good book. Allen and Bacon by Pearson was a great book that we used. But those scaffoldings text help a lot, but the course revolves around what the students are doing and a kind of like ongoing peer review for me.
Well, and that's timely because we just literally, I just finished comments today on a set of assignments for this class where you guys got to see that in practice, that idea of you're all putting your assignments up on a discussion board, you're giving each other feedback, you're reading each other's feedback, and then I'm chiming in to give feedback. So really it centers your texts, your assignments that you're writing as a main part of the course. So you're learning from each other as much as you're learning from Warnock and Dirksen and Hewitt.
But one of the things that comes into play there, though, is that again, the learner profile of the students at Drexel, or in our case, graduate students, it's harder in a first-year writing class with the learners that I see to rely solely on student writing as the textbook for the other students. I had one of my next question was going to be about peer review, how you settled, Scott, on the ways that you conducted peer review in this 10-week course in the class versus maybe other ways you had done it, because I feel like peer review is something that I change every single semester. Now I'm teaching face-to-face, but I change it every single semester, trying to find the thing that will work the best and get students engaged. And so I wonder if how you settled on this.
I think I missed the very end of that. You broke up a little bit, but it's all continuous eventually, Steph. So I think just at the very end, you said something about peer review being, and then I think then it kind of trailed off. I just want to make sure we caught it all. Okay, Heidi.
I think I'm having a problem with my internet connection, so I'm sorry about that.
It's really not that bad. It's a little bit pingy, but it's all kind of like stringing together. So I could hear you. So again, I think you raised again this good point about like different kind of student cohorts. Although I think that one thing is, I think a little bit of a myth about writing is that the students aren't teaching themselves. You're facilitating their interaction through writing. So you don't have to say, I use this analogy of because I had a gym teacher like this who rolled out the balls and sat on a stool. An hour later told us to go to the next class, and I don't ever envision us in that kind of role. But I think also that the peer review sometimes, and this is I get this in doing workshops all the time, pejoratively, people will say, well, this is the blind leading the blind, right? That kind of thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's only if you're emphasizing that you're expecting the student reviewers to be like these ace reviewers who are going to turn this paper around. To me, and I talk to my students pretty openly about this, like the review is more for them than it is for the reviewee. It's the person being reviewed. Like I'm the teacher still. I'm thrilled, of course, when I have students who can do a good job reviewing. It actually makes my life easier. I'm not going to deny it. But the review process is like you interacting with each other's texts. One is it's great if there's some interaction there where the students are helping each other, but then seeing it like, okay, this can help me. But I also think that it helps them see it through my eyes of what I'm looking for in these written projects to then try to transfer that to their own writing. Because it's not that one of the big challenges that students have with their writing is like they know, like, is that the classic thing in a writing center? I know what I want to say and I can't say it, right? Like they do know what they want to say. They often verbally articulate it quite well. Even students who their written literacy isn't that high. So I think, one of the things I like about online peer review, which by the way, you can be teaching on site and still use online peer review, is that you can put students in different things like peer review groups like we did in the class that we just described in the book. So students, one, have a little bit more of that like extension of time that you get asynchronously, where they can like look at a paper and not have to, say something clever or something right in front of everybody, or even write very quickly in class, which keep in mind, like we're moving away from this in some ways, But like Mine O'Shaughnessy talked about years ago, like the literacy problem students have because they literally write slowly, you know? Like what an aha moment when you're like, they're tired, their arms are cramping up because they never write, you know? So now we don't think about that as much, but now they have this like extension of time and they can see what other people are doing if they're in a small peer review group, so it's not in front of the whole class. So I do think that writing about writing, like the student text is an artifact to use, but you know, there's lots of other things you can use. And if you're using textbooks, you're certainly getting model text. And there's also a little interesting thing, which we talk about in the book, which is like you as the teacher become a model text throughout the term. You know, you're doing writing like not just literally what you're writing, but also like moderating behaviors, managing conversations, those kind of things. I really should have a better way of like ending because I keep like trailing off and everyone's like, well, now what? I should like need to say over or something like that, like on old radio speed.
Roger. Other questions anyone has? If not, I'll jump in and ask another question.
Well, I've got a couple if nobody else wants to go. Well, I want to circle back to the question of Diana because I think her presence in the book is what really makes this a unique insight into the daily texture of an online writing class. And so from you as the teacher on this side, Scott, what came out of this experience that you captured in the book that you sort of went, wow, I never saw that before? Or were there moments of surprise or moments where you realized I need to change something I've been doing? I've never seen it that way before. Because I think that's one of my pet peeves is we just don't get enough solid user feedback from our students. You get these evaluations which are lame and worthless at the end of the semester, and you get the work that the students produce. But what have you learned about this kind of developing this student-centric view, and how can we build on the work that you're doing here to get a better sense of, you know, what are the students actually getting out of our classes as opposed to what do we think they're getting out of them?
Well, there's a range of things, and that is a really great question because one very broad thing that I got out of this is I'm embarking now, although it's had a slow start for a variety of reasons, including Drexel's IRB, but I'm really interested in the student perspective, and I'm in the midst of this project to try to talk to international students who are taking online writing courses to see what their experiences are like, because I really think that this methodology, if you will, of getting the students to speak, not just in a survey, but like I have a journalistic background, so like interviewing students really appeals to me, by the way. So like I want to talk to students who are taking online writing courses from international settings and see, you know, there's a little bit of this promise of we're closing borders, and I want to see if that's really true. Like, what are their experiences really like? So in a big picture way, doing this work with Diana helped me think like that I need more ways to get this kind of feedback from students. But it's funny, there's some little things that came out of this. One, you may have picked up on that jumps out at me that I can bring up is the my favorite poster thing, which I always was a big fan of that, you know. And as it turned out, like Diana, who by the way, Diana is like very confident, very happy to be like number one. If you didn't get that from her, like she's a competitive person and she'd be, you know, she was like the best poster in the class, okay? And I mean, there were other good posters, but everyone voted her that, if you'll recall. And I was really surprised the way she characterized that. That was a chapter we went round and round about the most, in fact, because I felt like I wanted her to say whatever she wanted, but initially she was so negative about like being called the best poster. And I was like, but why? Like I don't think you were, we anyway, we had a lot of revision about that. And it turned out that because of that, I don't use that anymore. I'm going to use threads that say, like her suggestion was not just have favorite poster, it's too narrow, but give ways of rewarding people for a variety of different kind of things they do. Like what was the best conversation in the course? Who was the best post, you know, the funniest poster? Who was the person who used like all these different categories? And that got me thinking more about how, you kind of can narrow the way you ask students to like compete in the class, but the discussion board, it's also public. Like everybody can see everything that happens in the class. So one of the things that this experience of working with Diana made that really apparent to me. And, how crucial, it's funny because some of it too was just teaching based. Like she was obviously like a really strong person in the group project, maybe too much so. And that was another part of the book where I was like, oh man, like, can I stand by what happened in this group project? Should I go back and change these grades? Because she did something that, if you look at it, she did something that I don't know that we would want students to do in a group project, right? I mean, in a way, I don't know, man, that's too strong because but, she took over the writing of it, the composing at the end of it, and if we think about the composing process as all these different parts, then I'm good with it, and I guess you would be. But she kind of said, like, you give me all the pieces, I'm going to put it all together and do some things that, it's funny thinking of Steph's questions about different student cohorts, probably be hard pressed to get a student like that in every group, in any class, let alone in certain classes where you're like working with basic writers. Probably not. Keep in mind, I had Diane in another class where we did it. It was like a writing for the web class. It was like we did a class-wide group project to make a zine. Guess who was the editor-in-chief? So this is a student with a unique personality, and you wonder if, like, obviously student experiences are unique in classes based on the teacher, but this was really like making me think about how much was driven by her particular expertise in this environment. So there's just a couple things. There were, obviously, I had a lot of discoveries, which I described in the last chapter, that got me thinking about some things about how teaching online, and teaching writing online specifically should go forward. So thanks for that question, Michael.
This is Ben again, and following up on that question, one thing we discussed in our class actually was the way in which Diana is a very strongly intrinsically motivated student. I'm curious how you think a student's experience would be if they were less intrinsically motivated, and maybe less motivated in general.
So that workshop I did today for new faculty, talking about frequent low-stakes grading, I actually had on my slides, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And part of the argument for, which I used in this class, the low-stakes grading approach, frequent low-stakes grading, FLS grading I call it, just, this doesn't have to come with online learning, but I definitely this is something I learned from teaching online. Because I'm like, how can I have this dialogue with students without, breaking my teaching back, giving feedback? So I was like, wait, if I give, I'm not a big oppressive grader, I think by nature, but if I was like, wait, if I give so many grades that the grading then becomes like, we have like a tipping point where they become unimportant, can I then get maybe have this crossover where all this extrinsic motivation, where they're just simply the baby birds who want those little rewards, then they're like, I get so many grades that the individuals don't mean that much. So I can take risks. I can, understand how I'm doing in the course. I can understand that every week I don't have to be on top of my game. So I think that one of the interesting things about writing online, at least asynchronously, and I did it one way too, by the way, which is another very narrow thing about the book, but I'm not the only audience. So students, in many cases, and Diana talks about this a lot, it kind of weaves its way through the narrative of how she was writing for these peers of hers. And while I was there are times teaching online, I know those of you who've done it, where you feel like you're standing in the back of a room jumping up like, don't forget about me, which is kind of where you want to be. So I feel like that, there's always this challenge, of course, in school. Students are graded. At Drexel, by the way, one thing, I should have said this, by the way, Stephanie, our profile, Drexel's $70,000 a year. Yeah, I love the eyes. The eyes, just everybody's eyes went like this. Whoop! Yeah, it's 70 grand. So it's really, students, it's a private school, so there's a lot of, internal granting and stuff, but these students are coming out with six-figure debt. So why I say that in the context of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, they are very extrinsically motivated not to fail a class. They can't do another term. So I think that this model allows them to see what each other is doing in a way that is kind of anti the silo that normally happens in education, where they have no idea. They're just competing blindly, charging ahead, 10 weeks at Drexel, so that on teaching online, and writing online, they're seeing what other students do, and they have a sense of community, I think. I know Beth Hewitt hates that word in this context, but I believe in it. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Scott, I've got to tell you, I actually asked as a bonus question for a discussion board what students thought Beth would think about something in your book, because we're reading Beth and you. It was kind of interesting. One of these classes, I'm going to have both of you on and let you go head to head. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes until I've got to cut this off. So any other questions?
I'd like to ask one about your alter ego, Dr. Do you call him Logoetho? How do you pronounce his name? Or Loguetho? I don't know how you do that.
I will tell you, I had to retire him because one of the students Googled him. So I went with, it used to be Logoetho, and now I go Etho-Patho, but you can pronounce it any way you want. I don't think I got the market cornered on that.
Okay. Have you always, I thought it was interesting that you did the demo, slipped in as a demo student, but yet you have the name doctor in front of it, and so they knew who you were. Have you ever had it backfire at all? Have you ever gotten any pushback? Or has it always been kind of fun and successful?
One student, love this question. First of all, I'm glad you asked about this, because if you were going to say, first of all, why shouldn't teaching be fun? But using these kind of alter egos, by the way, I should be clear, I identify as a writer, since I was a little, I can't reach up and grab, maybe I can. 5th grade, there's my little sci-fi book I wrote in 5th grade. It's sitting above my desk. Stories about Ant-Man and a world with no music and stuff. So I've always thought of myself as a writer. And I say that because, let's face it, if you don't enjoy writing, I think teaching writing online, or actually teaching many classes online, is going to be kind of a drag. I really like getting in and writing with my students. I do. Back to Ben's question, I enjoy it. There's just no other way to put it. But these alter egos, I think it's so much fun. And the students, I just taught a hybrid course, and this was by far their favorite part of the course. So Dr. Logoetho, which, do whatever you want with the pronunciation, he comes in, and I had one student who was an international student who totally didn't get it. And he was like, who is this person? And I think it was a little bit of a cultural educational moment, because, the other students, they catch on just like that. Okay, and I'm pretty brash, as you saw, which I'm not to the students at all when I deal with them normally as Scott, as Professor Warnock. And they are able to do these really great things. So I kind of was I wanted to debate, to argue. They obviously can run into problems when they do that with each other, although I have some great, very mature arguments in my class. I wanted them to argue with me, but I'm still the teacher. And I feel so I came up with this idea, and it has really worked well. I highly encourage you to try it. And you just use these outlandish claims. And, the college should cost more for Drexel students. I can hear their heads explode in West Philly when I make this argument. They are appalled. I will tell you another time where generally it didn't go well. Little cautionary tale. I used a thread based on a reading in one of our textbooks about one of these high-achieving students that you run into. She'd done everything, she'd done all this community service. She worked for Habitat for Humanity. So Dr. Logoetho, jerk that he is, comes in and says, I think this student is just trying to, she doesn't care about this stuff. She's just trying to build her resume for college. And the students were all like, yeah, you're right. They're like, that's what we do too. So I was like, oh, that one didn't work. So, I'm trying to find things that they will really argue with. And what I really like is how sometimes at the end of the term, and this happened this past winter, and it happened in Diana's class too, you saw, the students actually get together. And a moderator will come in and say, oh, yeah, here he is again. We're going to get him this time. And they'll, again, they're supposed to make, arguments that are driven by research and evidence, not just throw stones at Dr. Logoetho. And I will kind of through the course of the week give in and acknowledge that they're, oh, I never really thought of that, or, oh, you got me on that. So I want to see them use their, we could all use a little more reasonable discourse, couldn't we? Thanks for that question.
I do want to just pop in before we exit tonight. Hi, Scott. I'm Jesse. We have met before.
I know you, Jesse. How are you? I see you there.
I'm doing okay. I've just been following along. I do okay in Zoom for the most part, but it's difficult. I'm reading everybody's lips, so it's hard for me to judge when I can pop in and out. One thing that we've talked about in class a little bit is we're just curious how the class actually looked. And you don't actually say what LMS you were using, but I think you use Blackboard at Drexel. Do you use Blackboard at Drexel, or were
Yes. Yeah? Yep. Blackboard.
So we were just curious if we would be able to like just see what the class, like how you set up your class, or if you'd be able to share it with us, if there would be a way for you to like make a model class that we could look at or something, or just because for some of us, I think some of the I don't know, the navigational design or whatever, we're just kind of curious how some of that looks in a really good writing class. Because for a lot of us, like, because we never took an online writing class, we've never seen a lot of those, and it was really great because Heidi was able to get some of those and put them in our course shell. But like, we hadn't seen a lot of them, so that was one thing we were curious about.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's good to see you, and I wish you'd told me earlier because I would have slowed it up a little bit. I have this Northeastern speeding through the conversation. So we do use Blackboard. That was a decision in the book that we made to try to stay platform agnostic, if you will, which I think we mentioned. Everything that, I've some experience mostly from the training side with Canvas, Moodle, D2L, and everything that we do in the book, you could do on any of those platforms. I don't want to fumble around with it now because I'd have to go back to my Blackboard class and see like what I could. That's a shame. I wish. Bottom line is, I would be happy to show you my class. I want to warn you, you're going to be underwhelmed. It's just not that great. I'm not a great designer, and my courses, when you see them, you're like, I could do that, and that's what I hope you see. I think that if there's magic is too strong a word, but the expertise comes through in the pedagogy. It's kind of like if you saw me walking around, you'd see the same thing about my fashion sense, The class itself, Blackboard is, you really have to work hard to make it, personalize it. It's boxy. I do think it's functional, and when I do trainings, I do recommend people use their LMS, especially early on, so they can get on-campus support. But I don't have an issue sharing. I could share some screen capture or something and send them to you. Like I said, I'd be kind of fumbling around. Obviously, you can share screens here, but I have to see like what students have done and what, right now it'd be kind of hard for me to do that. But I could probably go back a couple terms to my last online course, and I'm happy to show you kind of here's how the discussions are. But I really have stayed. This is somewhat because I've been in so much of a training role. I do stuff. It's pretty simple. It's not very jazzy, and you could certainly do things in a much more visually and possibly like learner-friendly way than I do it. Especially because so much of my class happens on the very simple function of the discussions, the discussion boards. So, but I don't have any issue sending Heidi some screen captures if you want to share them.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because if we could see Scott's class, I'm going to guess Scott uses probably the least amount of multimodal materials of Scott, Michael, and I. And for those of you going into 73, 72 in a couple weeks, you're going to see the other end of that spectrum. And Michael is very multimodal. So I think that they're all good classes. And I think that they're just a really wide range of design choices. And I think the most important thing when I do training is to help people start with their strength. Like where you feel strong, where you feel comfortable, start your online course there. Add in slowly other things over time, but don't think you have to make a video every week because Michael Greer makes a video every week and they're all perfect. Or do a discussion board every week because Scott Warnock does one every week and he's crazy. I mean, great at it. But yeah, just think about where your comfort zone is because online education can be good. Beth Hewitt teaches totally different from me and she does a great job, but she's very, very different. I want to say to Scott, 2 questions real quick. I shared with him that you keep a time log, your crazy, crazy time log. So can you show them what that looks like real quick? Isn't it 15-minute increments?
So you want people to leave thinking I'm crazy, and of course I'm just walking right into it here, but they're 12-minute increments, first of all. And I am going to write an article for the Chronicle about this at some point because there was a method to the madness. But I was trying to see like where my time goes because I think we have a very poor sense of that in general, right? Like I wanted to know, I coded my time based on, this is kind of just a general professional question you're asking, but I'm a writing program administrator. I feel like I'm active in my scholarship and research and, you know, teacher. I'm very active in my community. I'm a school board member. I'm president of a recently founded education foundation. So I was like, where's my time going? Like, I feel, you know, like many of us do. And I have like, to be blunt, you know, I have some pretty unhealthy work habits sometimes. You know, I have a day where I have red for research, green for teaching, blue for service to my program, black for service to the university and other service, and pencil was for other stuff. And it's like, if I see these colors, like it looks like, you know, one of those coral snakes or something, that's a bad day. Like I obviously some days you can't help it when you're on campus, but like we should be focused more, you know, like the distractions, disruptions are just like, you know, how do you do the big things if you know, the little rock, big rock metaphor, whatever works for you. But so I kept track of it for almost 2 years to see. And I did the 12 minutes because like lawyers won't think this is crazy because lawyers are asked to do this, you know. But it was kind of eye-opening to see where my time went and how much time I was putting on certain things. And, you know, I try to be an active parent too. And, you know, it can be, sometimes you feel overwhelmed, but it was interesting to see like where it was going. And I don't know that I was saying like I was spending time ineffectively overall, but it was like in the days themselves, I'm supposed to be doing a research project and I noticed I spent 2 12-minute increments on it. Like that's, you know, that's stressing you out. That's not healthy. Right?
We had the discussion last week was about like the reading load and literacy load and just stress load of being an online student or being an online instructor and how you can handle that. And I just did a time log last week to see kind of percentage wise what I'm spending time on, and it wasn't a typical week, so it wasn't a very accurate representation because I spent like half my time doing research writing, which never happens. I never get that kind of research time. It just was a funky week. So
I know it's, and by the way, just I know we're winding up here, but I do want to say that if you're going to go asynchronous, which is kind of like the model, and I talk about this, like track your time to some, you know, you don't have to be that, but you know, you should not be managing you have to think what's happening in class. Diana, this was a great moment in the book where we started talking about homework. Like we kind of came to this and it was like, you have to think like what is happening in class and spend the time on that. And you just can't continue to expand that. You will burn out. You will badmouth OWI. It's just, you'll be frustrated in your career. Like there's just things that don't get done. And you know, you walk out of classes regularly on site where you're like, wow, I wish we had 20 more minutes, but you don't. So you have to say, I have an hour and a half to manage discussions this week. I'm going to do the primary posts, you know, for 45 minutes on Thursday, get back to stuff on Friday. And then that's my work for that course, you know? And one thing about online is you can carry that stuff to the next week. So there is ways to even enable that kind of teaching.
well, thank you so much for being with us. I've recorded the session, so I'll post this if you want to go back and see anything or revisit anything. Hopefully we'll have Diana come in later this term. And Scott, I'll let you know what day she's going to be in. So if you do want to come in or you have time to come in again, you can just do that if you want, but no pressure. Clearly you're kind of busy. But I really appreciate this, and I hope you all got a lot of stuff out of it. And we're going to move our discussion to the discussion board. So now go in into the week 5 discussion board and kind of do your summaries of what you took away from talking to Scott, what you're taking away from the readings this week, and then how this is connecting to the work that we're doing in the class right now. So.
Well, thank you. I just want to say, I hope this was helpful. I really enjoyed talking to all of you. And if you do have questions, don't hesitate at all. Heidi has my contact info. Send me an email or pick up the telephone. Remember that thing? And I'm happy to talk further. Love talking about teaching writing online. So take care, all.
Okay.